Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core Podcast. I am Urza Master. Joining me as always, Fert Derby and Lord Uther. Good morning, gentlemen. We are back again with an episode of Coffee and Trek. And today we are talking again, Season 3 of the original series of Star Trek, Whom Gods Destroy. Not the progressive metal band formed in 2023 by former members of other bands. I guess you could call them a supergroup. To be honest, I haven't heard of any of them. But no, we are flashing back to 1969. And gentlemen, let's just kick this off with Fert Derby today. I'd love to know what was going on behind the scenes in this episode. I'm dying to know, in fact.
So glad you asked, Urza Master and Lord Uther. Good morning to all of our Warp Core viewers, or good afternoon, good evening, or good night. We have indeed turned the calendar, ripped out December, and we are now on January 3rd, 1969, an epic year that has been cataloged and covered in pop culture. There was so much going on in 69. Where were you in 69? Star Trek was on its last warp core nacelles, chugging along merrily to the conclusion of Season 3. And this particular episode is Whom Gods Destroy. And we had someone new and someone old behind the scenes this week. The newbie was our director, Herb Wallerstein. And actually, he ends up, little trivia question here, he actually ends up directing the final original series episode. So we'll be talking about Herb a little bit later in our travels. Mr. Irwin, Lee Irvin, it would be his full Christian name. He did the story and teleplay for this episode. He collaborated with Jerry Saul on the story. Now, Jerry is someone we've discussed before on this show, this very Warp Core podcast. He wrote This Side of Paradise, where Spock and Kirk and everybody had a case of the hippies after being injected by flowers. He did that story with D.C. Fontana. And Jerry also wrote the Corbomite maneuver. And we talked about that way back in Warp Core 34. You can see all of these things in our archives. Check out Warp Cores 34 and 42 if you want to get a handle on Jerry. But Lee Irwin, who ends up getting the credit for the teleplay, he's a newbie. And he worked on some interesting shows. He met Gene Roddenberry working on The Lieutenant, which was a cop drama that Gene worked on prior to Star Trek. But he also contributed to Have Gun Will Travel, television's Tarzan, Sea Hunt, Peyton Place, which was the original Twin Peaks before Twin Peaks without owls and dwarves and black lodges, Bewitched, and The Flying Nun. So Sally Field, he did some scripting on that one as well, which is a cult favorite, even if it's not one of yours. So a little bit of comedy, a little bit of drama in Lee's quiver. And that's kind of what we get here, gentlemen. I have to say, I sort of kicked this one off just by how we feel about the up and down season of Season 3 so far. This particular Trek felt like an Adam West Batman episode. It's mainly in presentation, but it just felt like we had our Star Trek cast members sort of interacting with a rogues gallery of colorful villains and, shall we say, punchy, over-the-top acting. And I think we can credit the two primary villains in this, the Starfleet, former Starfleet Captain Garth, played by Steve Inhat, and Yvonne Craig, who gave us the green-skinned and devilish Marta. And I can't believe that even in 1969 that they would blow up a character, simulate blowing up a character on screen. As soon as I saw the puffs of smoke and the bang, I said, did they really just blow up Marta? And turns out it looks like they did. But she was alternating between seductive and silly, as was a good chunk of this episode, gentlemen. Love the opening again. Love the premise. The inmates are running the asylum. But what we had was, and the sign and countersign that we had with Scotty and Kirk, I don't know if that was just a Starfleet failsafe. I don't know if it's ever been revisited on any of our other Trek properties in the franchise. Seems like a pretty good security measure if you hammer out a good one. Scotty keeps quoting a chess move, queen to queen's level 3, and nobody seems to want to answer that, which is how we get a 50-minute episode, until Lieutenant Spock does give us the correct answer to the riddle, queen to king's level 1. So there's another trivia answer for you next time you're at your favorite watering hole and they're doing Star Trek trivia. You can dazzle them with the answer, queen to king's level 1. I love that hook. I think once they establish that Gareth isn't going to get it out of them, we spend a lot of time on the narrative treadmill trying to get it out of them. There's not really any escalation. You know, he tries various tricks to get the information out of, but ultimately we're sort of stuck in place there. Kirk won't give it up, and Gareth won't stop asking him. I think there were moments with Steve Inhat where he was a very effective foil for Kirk and Spock and the crew, and other times where director Herb Wallerstein just kind of let him, run as far as he would take it, and he took it far. And so, gentlemen, I'm just curious how it played with you. I'm not ready to throw this one out with some of the other ones we've had this season so far, but it certainly is not top tier Trek in the overall vibe. When I finish the episode, maybe it's a meh. But what did you guys think of Whom Gods Destroy?
I love the comparison to Adam West Batman. If they would have added the sound effect, they would have totally had it. To be perfectly honest, I actually really enjoyed this episode. From the sense of it was very goofy. I don't understand why this was not aired by the BBC until 1994. Even of the era, I didn't think Marta's like seductive, sexy dance was. It was very much not very seductive nor sexy. It was just weird. I thought her character was really great for like a criminally insane Orion slave girl who's, waxing and waning between, I'm going to overthrow the powers that be to do this love thing with Kirk, to I'm going to murder him because I love him so much, but I'm actually devoted to the cause here. It was all over the place, but it was supposed to be. So I liked that part of her character. I think the problem was Garth, who I loved. I love the overacting Shatner scene where he was supposed to be Kirk and then he flips out because he can't figure out the key to get to the Enterprise. I laughed so hard. Like, I don't think you were meant to laugh at that. I think it was supposed to be more dramatic than it was, but it came across as truly comedic. And I think they were trying to do two things at once. They were trying to make something kind of silly and funny, but also sort of serious and I don't know, foreboding. And I think if you gave up the serious and foreboding and made this like sort of an Adam West Batman style, Arkham Asylum episode, I think it would have been really successful. I think it would have been funny, but still there were some stakes, and it was a relatively compelling story. So I didn't hate it. But I think they just kept trying to go back to, no, we're telling a serious story here, which was clearly not the case. And it just seemed like, Kirk and Spock were never really out of control. So, like, the stakes were never terribly, terribly high. But I felt pretty, and when Garth became Spock, like, it was like super obvious. And I think even to Kirk, it was very obvious. So, again, making it more silly would have been stronger. I think we wasted some characters too. We had an Andorian, we had a Tellarite that really didn't do anything the whole episode. Two pretty important, like, potential antagonist races that they've used effectively in other episodes, and they're just afterthoughts here. Plus the, like, red feather boa coat, like, that the Andorian is wearing. What late '60s drag queen's closet did they pull it off of? Because she needs it back. I did, again. I did not dislike it. Kudos to our resident Tellarite, Gary Downey, the lesser known Downey brother. But it was interesting that, this could have been, I think, if you gave it like a Harry Mudd instead of, Fleet Commander Garth, this would have made a great Harry Mudd episode. Because his episodes could be silly and fun with stakes, but, like, goofy stakes where it's not, life threatening or anything. It's just sort of comic relief, which I do think this season could use more of. I think it's something where they aimed really high in a lot of these episodes for drama, and they should have leaned a little bit more into the funny bone. I also think it's a little odd that the ship has medication that cures all insanity. Why didn't they just bring it with them in case something like this happened? Like, it just seems, to quote Spock, logical. So it was odd, but I do love the nod to Longfellow. I love some of those literary nods that they give in the Star Trek universe. But again, I was entertained. I didn't hate it, but I would agree it's not what I would call top tier Trek either.
Yeah, I felt like it was a Justice League versus the Legion of Doom episode.
Excellent.
Because of all we're missing is a Klingon. And back to your Batman reference, we've got Batgirl in this episode. So Yvonne Craig was obviously in this episode, so I thought that was just kind of funny that it was campy, like something that was Batman, and then you've got Batgirl in it. Could have done more. I think, here you supposedly have the second best. It sounded like the second best Starfleet captain, right? Just, Garth, or was it? Yeah, because Kirk first, Garth second, or something like that. Or didn't even Kirk say he learned Garth's strategies?
At the Academy.
Yeah, to me, again, you just could have done something a little more with this. It could have turned into a Wrath of Khan type of episode where you could have got Garth on a ship or something and had him use the strategies against Kirk. I think that would have been something, which I think I brought that up in a different episode before with another Starfleet captain. So I like to see more things like that. This was a campy episode. Almost can't figure out if the cast was getting sick of it or mailing it in, or I'm not sure what was going on here. Maybe they're bored at this point. But you can, I don't know, I feel like you could kind of see the writing on the wall. So to me, average episode, not something I would write home about. Could have had a little bit more of that dramatic flair, but they were probably going for camp.
The two things that my notes stood out for, I didn't like the way they used DeForest Kelley in this one. You had Scotty running the show from up there. You had him telling Sulu to find the weaknesses in their force field. And that was a nice little, B storyline, or sort of adjacent to what we were seeing on the planet. But basically, Bones just stands by Scotty's side and just kind of like, there's nothing else you could have done, Scotty, or, what I feel so helpless. Or it just, McCoy, again, he's one of the core three. Scotty's like 3.5, and I just felt like they when we're dealing with the treating the insane or all of that, as Urza and Lord Uther point out, you could have worked in a little bit more of the science, the medical, something with McCoy to do. He just kind of stood around the bridge and just kind of nodded and said, "Yep, this isn't good." Or Scotty, we've got to, we can't beam him up, or he didn't really, yeah. And to your point of kind of phoning it in, it just felt like McCoy's like, all right, I'll just stand here. And there was a real, you go ahead.
I think it's funny too that a lot of people wanted to see a Captain Sulu series, where who was sitting in that chair the most? It was Montgomery Scott when they were off ship. So, obviously Sulu pulls it off better in Star Trek 6, but I just think it's interesting that Scotty was in that chair so many times and everyone was clamoring for a Sulu type episode, or Sulu type series.
Can I just say that, having not really seen a lot of these original series episodes prior to my knowledge of Star Trek growing up with the feature films and the other Rick Berman next gen universe set shows, I love young Scotty. Like, I think Montgomery Scott, like, I just have a different impression of him as sort of an older, mustached engineer. Not that the character is not lovable and endearing and loyal and all of those things in the films, but I just love young, vibrant, just clean-shaven Scotty. Like, he was really terrific, in that.
And he has an edge to him too at times. Like, right. When he's in command, he's in charge. There's no wavering.
Right.
Which again, I find that kind of interesting, because I think at times Scotty's almost been used as comic relief, except for Star Trek 2 when he walks in with the dead cadet. But he bangs his head in Star Trek 5. It was that 5 where he hits his head on the beam and stuff like that.
Out for half the movie.
Right, yeah. Makes his little comments and quips here and there. But here, to your point, which I think is an excellent point, he is more, well, I guess he has his moments where there's a little bit of comic relief. But again, when he's on that bridge, it's very evident that he's not just in charge, but he has respect to the bridge crew as well. And I think those are two separate things, right? You can be in charge of something and have the respect of the staff around you. So yeah, I just think that was another interesting.
Well, I think too with
go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No.
With James Doohan, I think that's his military background. I think he knows how to carry himself as a captain, and I think of all the Star Trek characters and all the actors, I think he may have been the highest ranked for those who have military experience. So I do think the reason why we never saw Montgomery Scott as a captain is just like we never see Kirk truly leave the Enterprise. They both are in love with this ship, just in different ways. And that's what I want. I want Strange New Worlds in this upcoming season. I want them to build that love between the Enterprise and Montgomery Scott. If that's what this whole season story arc for Strange New Worlds next season is about, it will be a complete vindication of Montgomery Scott's character for all the original series and movies, because he's just I agree. I think he may be the best original series character, particularly with what we've seen so far.
And I just think this episode had an odd fetish affection for chairs. When they like at every turn, it seemed like there were chairs, and they weren't particularly like, oh my gosh, look at those chairs. I mean, they were just like, here, we need a prop to put on the pedestal so he can be, crowned master of the universe. And so you have this sort of just 1960s, break room chair, situation. It was just a little, I just thought, like, boy, there's a lot of chairs in this episode that we're going through here. So that was just, one of those things that you go, huh? Did you ever see that Star Trek with all the chairs? Like, people would then know, oh yeah, The Moon Gods Destroy, season 3. So.
I've been watching some next gen stuff that's been on Pluto TV, and because they have a channel just dedicated to that, and they have one that's TOS and DS9. you look at this third season, at least for me, I'm still amazed that movies got made. Just I feel like the path it was going down. I think Star Wars, and maybe Fert can help with that. Like Star Wars probably helped the Star Trek movie get made. I'm guessing.
Oh yes.
Right, and of course with the loyal fan base. So, and as I'm watching Next Gen, the series just gets stronger and stronger every season. And talking about going out on a high point and we'll get to this when we talk about Next Gen, but I think it's important because I feel like Next Gen really propels Star Trek at warp speed. Forward is probably appealing to the masses a little bit more and allows all these other shows to branch off in a sense because it was so good, especially in seasons, in my opinion, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are just such strong seasons and allows the movies to be made, and we're going to get DS9, and we're going to get Void. All these things are going to happen because it was so strong. And it's almost like it's a miracle. Like Scotty was down in engineering and allowed TOS to come back in a movie, and let the series continue on. So, and luckily the movies were strong in that sense too, to allow it to keep going.
I think Star Trek, rightly or wrongly, and you can look at the timelines of this late '60s science fiction. I think the perception was like, the feature Forbidden Planet, or Lost in Space, or my father was a Martian. I think there was this perception that it was just kind of, oh yeah, science fiction. It's a little silly. Flash Gordon, it doesn't really hold up much for audiences. And then here comes Kubrick, with 2001. Let's give all the proper credits there. Let's give Douglas Turnbull Silent Running in 1972 with Bruce Dern. And then obviously George Lucas's little saga set in a galaxy far, far away. All of a sudden, literally, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and every studio, every 2-bit Hollywood producer, from Roger Corman, said, quick, these people, they are just printing money with Star Wars, and they were in 1977 and 78 and 79. And Paramount at the time was owned by Gulf Western, an oil company, and these guys didn't know Trek lore, and they weren't science fiction fans, and they probably didn't read Bradbury and Asimov and so forth. But they knew that in their holdings, in their portfolio, they had a science fiction property that had already, planted the seeds with a loyal fan base, and then that's how the movie got made. It was not some beloved, like, we should bring this back, or boy, I miss the crew of the Enterprise. It was how much money Star Wars made, and oh, you mean we own Star Trek? We have something? Great, let's make a movie. Let's make 10 movies, was the thought. And again, the guys ultimately making this decision were oil barons, per se, and they're the ones who approved it. And in our discussion of the motion picture, I think loyal Warp Core viewers can go all the way back to the beginning. They ended up spending a fortune. I mean, in 1979 dollars, I think the budget on the first Robert Wise Trek, it was close to 35 million, I believe, which was astronomical. I mean, Star Wars itself was only like 15 or 16 million, before various exchange rates and so forth. So it was, to your point, we were very fortunate that the right tumblers in the locks aligned at just that moment. That's very specific moment. 2 years too soon, 2 years too late, and who knows. But yes, we should thank George Lucas indirectly for giving us big screen Trek.
Well, and I'd like to just point out that this was an era, much like in the 60s with music, as Frank Zappa pointed out, a lot of the folks making decisions were not the young, hip, cool folks. They were old money, stuffy, cigar smoking, oil baron white guys who were just like, oh, we've got something like this. It's experimental. I don't get it. Put it out there. Let's see what it does. And, to a certain extent, that worked. You got a lot of great, great stuff that came of that. And I think that's where maybe it was a little discordant moving into the 80s with folks making decisions, where the fandom starts to take over a little bit. And I think that's where maybe Star Wars starts to go off the rails a little. As we move through the later 80s into the 90s and the prequel series, even though George Lucas is still pretty much in charge of that. But the Star Trek folks, to their credit, did not take that same path and just kept delivering really solid stuff. So, as opposed to what Frank Zappa said about music in the 80s, I think you see the complete opposite with sci-fi through the 80s and 90s, through up to today, with the exception of a couple things here or there. So, gentlemen, I think it's time we give this episode, That Which Gods Destroy, our Warp Core ratings, or Whom Gods Destroy, forgive me. I'll kick it off this week. I'm going to be perfectly honest and say I give this a 4.5 out of 7 Warp Cores. I think that's a little generous. I had it at a 4, but knowing that, we have Batgirl and the connection, I don't know why I didn't make it, but the connection of this being almost like a Adam West Batman episode gives it a lot more favorable light for me. So it bumped me up a half a Warp Core. I'm going 4.5. I think this is a very enjoyable episode. It's not fundamental Trek, but I don't know that you'll be totally disappointed watching it.
I'm going to go 4. And that's because if you have a Klingon, I mean, if you're going to have this, again, rogue gallery of bad guys and bad girls, where's the Klingon? I mean, what happened? So if there was a Klingon, it would get a 4.5 for me. Otherwise, I'm going to go 4.0. Fert?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I probably, in a more cynical age, might have even gone, slightly lower, but I think 4 is fair because, to Ursa's point, this is not Plato's Stepchildren, where watching it, was the equivalent of Quint dragging his nails down the blackboard when they're trying to figure out how they can keep the beaches open for the 4th of July. But again, I'm not going to try to pretend that this was one of my favorites. Even for an up and down season 3, we have seen some stronger Trek, or glimpses of it in episodes past. So let's go 4, and let's say if you've got time and you're just doing the random sampling, you could do worse, believe me. But I wouldn't put this right out before you've seen some of the other classics that we've gotten, sunk our teeth into.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, we have 10 episodes of Star Trek The Original Series left, which will bring us forward to Warp Core episode 90. If you need to catch up on the Warp Core, make sure you hit that subscribe button, drop us a like, let us know, how did you feel about Marta and Garth and Whom Gods Destroy and all the other episodes in our canon? We go forward on that 5-year mission that ran for 3 years. Again, next week on the Warp Core podcast. But until we see you, live long and prosper.